The religious right has known for a long time, really always, that their most precious resource is their stories. And if we can just meet them on that field with the stories that we have, which we are incredibly rich with, then I think that we'll really be contenders in, whether you want to call this the culture war or at this point just an actual war between people who want human rights for everyone and people who don't.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Secular Spotlight. I'm Leo Costello, the multimedia producer at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, here with Chris Line.
Yep, I'm Chris Line, Rapid Response Counsel here at FFRF.
And today we have joining us Drew McCoy, better known online as Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thanks for joining us, Drew.
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so we've got this new show, we're switching from Ask an Atheist, so what better way to start that than to talk about, why do we have a show? What can we do with it? What are we up against? What is the reason why FFRF needs to put out video content in the first place? And who better to discuss that with us than probably the most prominent secular, voice on media, on YouTube, Drew, Genetically Modified Skeptic. So I think that hopefully, we can talk this out and kind of just discuss what's going on in the media landscape and what can we do about it, and how can we work with people like Drew and other secular content creators to sort of tackle the misinformation online that's kind of affecting our country.
And we kind of want to paint a picture of the media landscape on the conservative Christian nationalist side, and how a lot of it comes from a lot of big money and how that's really kind of hard to fight against. But let's start by asking Drew, what kind of, can you just tell us, remind our audience, what kind of things you tackle on your channel and how you view the current media landscape?
Yeah, I talk about religion and politics from a secular viewpoint. I was raised as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian, and now I'm a agnostic or atheist. I don't really care about the specific label all that much. I fight for religious pluralism, which basically recognizes everyone's right to respect and dignity within the public square, so long as they are a person or a group is tolerant of other people. So I make content kind of trying to push forward that kind of perspective in the public sphere. So I have covered everything from talking about how science fiction is similar to theology at certain times. I've talked about how conversion therapy is regularly being normalized by the religious right in the country, and how you can kind of debunk conversion therapy and fight against it politically. I've also covered how conspiracy theories about furries in public schools was used to push forward Texas voucher bill for private schools and religious schools, essentially a whole scheme to fund schools with absolutely no oversight, which I know that FFRF has been actively fighting all over the country.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up about the furries. That kind of gets to one of the big issues in media that we're dealing with, which is that algorithms don't care about the truth.
Right.
They care about engagement. Outrage and misinformation spread way faster. So I'm sure way more people saw some videos talking about how there's furries in schools than heard your debunk, Drew, that's not actually happening.
All of that started with just a video of someone speaking in a city council meeting, and just completely running their mouth with no evidence of this whatsoever, just making something up on the spot, and then that video was circulated among other city councils in other cities. It actually jumped the border from Canada to Michigan, and then to the rest of the U.S. south of Michigan after that, and just there was video after video after video of actual legislators, like elected officials, spreading this conspiracy theory with absolutely no evidence. And then Moms for Liberty took that on. Texas Governor Greg Abbott started saying the same thing. And again, there was never any sort of evidence whatsoever for this conspiracy theory. But
if it works for your
cause, able to circulate
you just pick up that ball and you run with it. And then if you try to dispute it with evidence, they just say fake news. And it's just the cycle that has just been repeating over and over and over again for the past 10 years or so. I mean, at least it's been getting worse and worse, I think.
Right.
I think with the with Trump becoming president in 2016, especially in his second term, people have gotten a lot more comfortable saying like the quiet part out loud, basically, just because Trump has no filter. And we see that represented in those meetings like you were talking about, Drew, but also by influencers who support these messages. I put together a little montage of some of like the right-wing Christian nationalist voices that are really popular right now, including Charlie Kirk, who we'll talk about in just a moment. But I just wanted to paint a picture for the kind of messaging that we're trying to fight against.
The spiritual battle is coming to the West, and the enemies are wokeism or Marxism combining with Islamism to go after what we call the American way of life, which is, by the way, Christendom.
Yes, we want to protect Western civilization. We want both of those things. And it's completely rational to want both of those things. Christianity has profoundly shaped Western civilization. This country was founded on the principle that human rights come from their creator, not from the government.
Slavery is as old as time and has taken place in every corner of the world, even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
Do you think that Jesus Christ would want ICE to raid churches?
How you treat the stranger. The rule in Judaism, which takes these words very seriously, when it talks about the ger, right, which is what that means. The ger means to live, to reside in a place.
Live! Live!
They have to abide by the law of the land. That is one of the restrictions on whether you get to live there or not.
I'm not living around blacks. Sorry. You know, I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry. It's racial for me. And call me racist. Oh, very Christian of you. I don't give a f***.
The United States political order has been Christian nationalism. It's to say this is how we view the world, and we're going to treat people with certain privileges and rights and dignity and all the rest of it based on our Christian view.
You must come to terms with the fact that NASA and space missions have always been this big and gay. You just weren't alive for the original ones, and you need to learn the history of NASA, of the Apollo programs, which were occult and satanic. It was literally meant to be an antichrist movement to make people believe in man.
Those are some inflammatory statements from Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. Charlie Kirk was in there, obviously, Matt Walsh. These are opinions that you could say like it's a very small minority of people that really believe in these things. But I think now more than ever, we're seeing videos like those surface more and more. And your average person on TikTok is going to come across those a lot more frequently. Would you agree with that, Drew?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we can say, oh, it feels like maybe a minority of people really believe these things, but I don't know that we have to say that someone has to buy in completely to a Candace Owens viewpoint, you know, holistically. They don't have to agree with Matt Walsh on everything to absorb the things that these people say. You know, I have atheist friends in real life who, admittedly, they're not very integrated into the atheist community. They're rogue atheists living their lives, and they've heard things from Matt Walsh, and they suddenly start equivocating on supporting trans people because they don't realize that someone like Matt Walsh is speaking purely from a basically Christian fascist perspective. They've science washed a lot of their views. And so I would say that you don't have to completely agree with everything these Christian nationalist types think in order to have been very negatively swayed by them. Even just a touch of their talking point is enough to influence public discourse. Because
a lot of those creators might have an agreement on like anti-transgender values. And then if you just hear them talk about that, it doesn't mean you're aligning with everything all those people say. But if you hear these things coming from multiple sources, it starts to validate these ideas as like normal and acceptable and not problematic.
Right, it's that repetition and sort of like them all saying a little bit of the same thing that then makes it seem even more real, because you're like, oh, well, it seemed kind of crazy when this person said it, but then this other person agreed, and then this person agreed, and then even more so, one thing I noted from all that is that, like, you know, Nick Fuentes, obviously racist, right? But like all these things, that connection there with like Christianity. So like maybe you don't believe whatever specific conspiracy theory Candace Owens is doing, but she's doing it under the guise of Christianity too. And they all use that Christian nationalism mantle to connect all these little, so you might not believe any of these individual little theories, but it's all under the umbrella of like Christianity or what Christians would believe.
Yeah, and Nick Fuentes is an extreme example, and we're certainly not trying to paint a broad brush and say they're all like this, but Nick Fuentes does have a large following.
There are actually several threats on the lives of teachers and bomb threats in children's hospitals related to people like Matt Walsh and Libs of TikTok, Chaya Raichuk. I would say that a lot of the time, the Christian nationalists, big media types, I mean, people at the very top do cross the line into essentially performing something like stochastic terrorism, because people are attacked, killed, or at least threatened, including children in hospitals, because of content like this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, unfortunately, like, normal people who end up watching a lot of this stuff. It only takes one person who's not in the right mindset to hear all these conspiracy theories and then just take it too far, that they don't kind of recognize the extremism going on.
And I do want to take a moment to talk about Turning Point USA for a bit, because we can't really have this conversation without talking about the massive influence that Turning Point USA has had. Obviously, that was founded by Charlie Kirk, who was tragically murdered. And of course, we don't endorse political violence in any way, and that was like a true tragedy that happened.
Yeah.
But it really has shine a light on the kind of discourse that is being kind of normalized, because people have been describing Charlie Kirk as like he just wanted to have an honest debate. But really, it seemed like a lot of his debates was trying to just to get clips of people getting angry, and it didn't really feel like an honest discourse. But that has sort of been normalized, is that's how you debate people.
I think the thing we have to remember about Charlie Kirk is that he started his career as a grassroots political organizer first. He gained ties into the Republican Party first, worked directly with actual legislators first, and then became a social media figure after that, including his debates. Now, I think the fact that we remember him as a debate guy actually means that we've bought into the propaganda that he put out, that he produced. What he did was actually work with actual legislators, work with actual, Republican candidates to try to get them elected, to try to pass actual policy, to actually affect real people's lives. And he was successful. I mean, he was for the genocide in Gaza. He said that Palestine didn't exist and the Palestinian people didn't exist. They had no right to exist. He said that, people who have given any kind of gender affirming care should be publicly executed. He said that, gay and trans people under God's perfect law would have been stoned to death. He advocated directly for violence. He helped to produce a 12-part series with Ben Shapiro saying that George Floyd was not actually killed by Derek Chauvin and that the whole thing was a completely leftist hoax. So he directly supported and helped create political violence. And then he went to campuses to debate people to garner this image of someone who just wanted to speak. But his real work was actually bringing about real life outcomes for real people. And unfortunately, that's something that I think we're forgetting, because we bought into the media image that he cultivated.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember too that everyone gets kind of, can be through social media and through, culture, become extreme. We saw that with Charlie Kirk. I mean, we talked about this in a previous episode of Ask an Atheist, where we showed that, he used to support the separation of church and state. He was religious, but thought the separation of church and state existed. And then, more recently, he obviously denounced all of that and said, no, there's no separation of church and state. We're a Christian nation, and, really fully embraced Christian nationalism. I'm sure that also involved what you were talking about, Drew, with just becoming more extreme. And yeah, it is important too, I think, to distinguish people like Charlie Kirk, as Drew pointed out, who's a political operative. And that tied right in.
With connections to political and religious figures from the beginning, and was able to launch him into the stratosphere immediately.
Right.
If he were to just start with a camera and a microphone like you did, Drew, it's hard to imagine what Turning Point USA would have been, if anything at all.
Yeah, that's big.
Right, and I think that's the case for right-wing political figures generally. I mean, look at someone like Dennis Prager. Look at Ben Shapiro. these guys actually had failed in their careers, both as, Ben Shapiro was supposed to be a Hollywood screenwriter and failed in that. And then he just wrote clickbait articles for Breitbart after that, which is basically where failed screenwriters, failed Hollywood people go to live out a kind of miserable career writing clickbait for right-wing media. But then both PragerU and Ben Shapiro of the Daily Wire were contacted by the Wilkes brothers out of Conroe, Texas, who were Christian nationalists and didn't believe in climate change. And so what they wanted to do was help to create a huge propaganda network to fight against, pro-climate policies. And they were given something like, Ben Shapiro was given something like $6 million just right off the bat with very little proof of concept, and was able to launch an entire studio, which became at one point larger than CNN. And so I don't think that we can have any sort of conversation about right-wing political media, especially new media, without talking about the actual billionaires who have already existed before them that allowed them to start up. Yeah, right-wing Christian nationalist stuff does not actually succeed on its own in a grassroots way, like people like me do.
Yeah, it's. I'm curious why you think there's so much of that on one side of the political aisle and not as much on the other.
It's hard to say. I think that, first of all, it might be useful to talk about how right now, I don't think that we're dealing with conservatism versus progressivism, really, in the way that a lot of people think. I would consider something like the MAGA movement, I would consider Christian nationalism to not be a conservative movement. It is not trying to get back to something that we have already had. It's trying to create a new dystopian future for everybody, except for the Christian nationalists, and a utopian future for those select people. And while the U.S. obviously was founded after and during a massive genocide on the indigenous people and the erasure of plurality of people groups and religious viewpoints, I don't know that we were ever supposed to be a specifically Christian nationalist nation in the way that the Christian nationalists today want. And so I think that, the project of funding these kind of new media types has been really revolving around the idea that we need to create a new future for, let's face it, like the white race. And so I think there's a certain level of aggression that comes in that kind of progressive effort versus now I think that like people who are liberals or are often considered on the left in the US, kind of whatever that means, are actually taking the place of conservatives. We are often trying to say, hey, what we actually need is to continue the NGOs that help people survive, that fight disease around the world. We actually want to conserve the separation of church and state. We actually want to conserve a lot of the institutions that we consider to be things that make America great. And I don't know that a lot of people on kind of the left side of the aisle have thought that the way to accomplish that is to try to push into the new frontier of media and do something new. No, I think that our efforts have often been, let's just keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, because ultimately we're just trying to keep what we already have. I consider myself very much on the left. I'm left of most people. And I think that the answer to this is not try to just conserve what we already have. Of course, conserving the separation of church and state, obviously, call me a conservative on that if you want to. But no, I think that we actually have to aggressively fight for a future in the same way that the Christian nationalists are, in a progressive way that envisions an imaginative future that is better for us, but not just us, not just people that look like us or believe like us, but everyone, the entire human race.
Yeah, I think we're on board with that idea. I think one of the things that makes having conversations like this difficult across the aisle is that some of the people on the more extreme side of like Christian nationalism or evangelical Christians, for example, there's a lot of language of spiritual warfare and apocalyptic language. We recently had a new rapture that didn't come to pass. People talking about Trump is hand chosen by God to be our president. And a lot of this framing of like end times this is life or death, this is God versus everyone, you know. And when you're talking language like that, it's really hard to have a reasonable conversation with people.
I think the spiritual warfare narrative doesn't really start a conversation. It serves to end conversations. As soon as you say, this person is supremely evil, and we need to rally against them because they're supremely evil, they're in league with the devil or whatever, you obviously can't investigate a claim like that. I mean, how are you supposed to observe that someone is in league with an invisible monster guy? You can't. So what it does is just end the conversation. At that point, you shift toward action because talking is completely out at that point. And that's why I think that this is such excellent fuel to the Christian nationalist fire. It ends conversations, does not start them like they often pretend they want to do.
Yeah, and it's just also just obviously a lot easier for everyone to grasp. You know, like science is complicated. Truth can be complicated. Reason, understanding can be complicated, but like them, devil, bad. Very, very simple. Like you don't need a science degree to understand that, you know, the whatever the other side is in league with Satan and Satan's evil and they want to hurt you and be bad. Like it's just very basic, you know, sort of like human stuff, human, you know, development stuff that like is just easy for people to understand. Whereas obviously the problem we have, and I think this goes through politics and everything too, is just like, it's a lot harder to try to explain it. And if someone doesn't have a basic understanding, you can't even begin to start to, you know, explain the variance and stuff.
But a lot of times boring. And that's the unfortunate thing.
Right. And so, Drew, how do you, I guess that's a good question to ask you, since you do these videos where you try to explain things and use reason and stuff, like, how do you deal with that aspect of, like, keeping it entertaining, like making something where, like, we want people to actually watch this, but we also want them to be able to learn and understand reality?
I think it's really important that we try to teach nuance and complexity proactively rather than reactively. So what I used to do was make a lot of response videos where I just responded to people, try to debunk things. And while that gets a lot of eyes on you, I think it often centers the conflict rather than what you should take away from the dialogue. And so what I have tried to do is shift more toward proactive educational content. And that, like you guys are saying, is difficult to actually get people to want to watch. And for me, my success in being able to make content like that and keep my channel growing throughout has really been in finding stories that allow me to put something nuanced and educational into a narrative structure. So if it's talking about Christian nationalism and how people become Christian nationalists, how the power structure works, how the indoctrination works. Instead of responding to a Charlie Kirk video, what I do is talk about my own upbringing and tell the story of my own background at a Christian university, an evangelical Christian university that I graduated from, and also talking about how I was raised as a fundamentalist evangelical homeschooler who was taught conspiracy theories. When you put these things in a narrative structure, when you tell good stories, people pay attention just as much as, you know, they might pay attention to a vicious fight or conflict. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of us in the secular world have engaged in direct debate and conflict so much because we are so constantly attacked that we forget the power of stories and proactive education through narrative. I am really trying to push people to get more toward that. And I'm hoping that, you know, Secular Spotlight can be a part of that. FFRF does do proactive storytelling, and we need more of that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, Drew, because that is one thing I think we would like to try to do more of on this show, is get people, find guests who have a personal connection to what's happening out there. Because if we just come up here and lecture, you know, we could be sending out a good message, but like you said, people connect to stories. And yeah, I'm in the process of booking a guest who is a teacher in Oklahoma who recently received the God Bless the USA Bible. And we would love to talk to him about, you know, what it's like been as an educator in Oklahoma under the regime of Ryan Walters, who recently resigned. But yeah, stories are powerful. In your situation, Drew, when you want to talk about something that you don't have a personal connection with, is that when you do you intentionally seek out guests who do have a personal connection to talk about that stuff?
That's one way I may do it. Now, with the example of, as we mentioned earlier, this conspiracy theory about furries infiltrating public schools across the country, and how that was used, that was leveraged to pass these ridiculous school voucher bills that would fund religious schools. While I never went to public school, and I don't have any kids, I don't have anybody in public school really in my life. My nephew's too young for that still. And what I decided to do was do just kind of like some investigative reporting, but in a way that involved a lot of footage of these things happening in real time. And so I was able to craft a narrative in the same way that a journalist might, but with just a little bit of extra flair, a little bit of extra humor, which was easy given this topic, so that maybe younger people on social media would be interested. And I'm happy to say that the video did quite well. People were very interested in that. And that was also my first sponsorship with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Hey. You guys actually get, like, Chris Line, I have to say, like, I've said this a couple times before, but thank you so much for sending me the resources I needed to actually do that kind of storytelling. You know, you did a lot of the kind of investigative journalism, and FFRF had published tons of sources on this specific incident and conspiracy theory that I was able to draw from. And so when I'm saying FFRF has a role in proactive storytelling, that's what I mean. And I'm really hoping that FFRF can continue to do that, not only with me, but with other content creators, so that we can tell stories, even ones we may not be personally a part of, in an interesting way, which captivates a lot of people. It's been successfully done already. There's no reason we can't do it more.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for helping us with that. You know, I've always said that since I've been here at FFRF, we have the opportunity to see these things. You know what I mean? Because we're getting direct complaints from parents, students. Like, we see the real hurt on the ground.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to translate that. And I think sometimes we fail to do that. So that's why it's nice to be able to work with someone like Drew, who can, like, help us really amplify it when we have that message, because we see it constantly on the other side. Every First Liberty, Alliance Defending Freedom case, you know, has some poor aggrieved Christian who just wants to bake their cakes, and the gay people are picking on them by wanting to buy a cake, and they don't want to sell it to them. You know, things like they're able to twist the storytelling when the story should be so easily showing that they're wrong. I mean, we just saw yesterday at the Supreme Court, there were oral arguments about a Christian counselor who has never counseled anyone about gay conversion, but they're worried that even if they just talk about sort of the Christian conception of gender, and like that might be conversion therapy. And so they were able to get all the way to the Supreme Court, which seems poised to rule that states can't ban conversion therapy based off this lie. And the right has just spun that. I mean, through their media, I mean, through both social media and stuff like that. And we have to just do the opposite. You know, like, we need to show, actually, you know, other people are the ones getting hurt. You know, we need to really grab hold of the mantle of storytelling and say, no, if you allow conversion therapy, it's LGBTQ students, people, young people that are going to be hurt and will die because of this, you know, and just getting that out there. But, you know, as we've talked about, the money funding, those big media storms, they all work together, and it just gets against us. So we're glad to work with people like Drew to try to get more of that out.
I'm glad that you guys brought up the gay conversion issue specifically to just illustrate how much potential I think there is in this kind of approach of proactive storytelling and tying it back to actual legal issues and what people can do to do grassroots political organizing to, you know, fight for the separation of church and state and just human rights. My fastest growing video ever of my whole 7-8 year career on YouTube doing this full time was about gay conversion therapy, and about how a man who spoke at my university, who I had basically spoken to before, actually created a whole gay conversion therapy curriculum for Christian teenagers. So instead of just responding to his course and saying, well, this is wrong because of this and debunking this, what I did was respond to his narratives with narratives of my own, from my own experiences, from the experiences that are well documented out there of people going through conversion therapy. And that video was 2.5 hours long. It's one of the longest videos I've ever created in my life. It took me months to actually produce because I did it completely by myself. I didn't have any funding for that. And still, by just doing this proactive storytelling and combining that with a response to somebody else who was doing that on the right, I was able to have a video that got something like 500,000 views in a week. And now it has well over 1.5 million views. And it's become one of the things that I'm kind of known for online, is producing this big storytelling piece to counter the gay conversion stuff. And I see absolutely no reason why something like that can't be done again and again and again and again. And I know the FFRF is passionate about making that sort of thing happen.
It's all about the human connection, because you can talk all day about why it's legally and morally not correct, but to have somebody speaking on a personal level of how it affected them, that makes so much of a bigger impact.
I mean, I think that's a huge trap we've been falling into. I mean, I see this online. I see this a lot with our people that just sort of, saying like the separation of church and state is a thing. And we just sort of say like, that's the rule. It's like, follow it. Like the separation of church, like we separate church and state in this country. So that's it. But not explaining why, and for like a young person who especially now is going to grow up learning in Texas from David Barton that we actually didn't mean to have a separation of church and state and that we actually were meant to be a Christian nation, it's not going to be powerful to them to just say, no, the rule is separation of church and state. We don't mix them. You have to explain why. You have to show them the dangers, let them know the hundreds and thousands of years of death and fighting and stuff that we were able to avoid here in America by separating politics from religion and avoid a lot of those pitfalls. And that unfortunately is going to have to be our task. We can't just say, this is the rule, separation of church and state. We have to show them why that benefits them, how it hurts people when we don't follow it. And more importantly, and a lot of people are doing this, showing that even how important it is for Christians, and not make it seem like a thing where it's like, oh, of course the atheists want to separate church and state. They're afraid of Jesus and don't want it to show.
It's good for everybody, not just us.
It's good for minority religions and it's good for Christians who don't want, a different brand of Christianity taught, or maybe their beliefs in Christianity don't involve proselytizing. There's very different sects and stuff. So it really just is for everyone, but exactly to Drew's point, we got to do that storytelling. We can't just rely on, oh, this is what we want. It's the same way the other side is not just saying, we should be a Christian nation. They're attaching it to feelings and making it visceral. So Joe Kennedy, the famous case of the Supreme Court where he prayed on the 50-yard line, it was this inspirational story, for Christians. They made a movie about it. He's a hero. All of this, we don't have a student, who was able to make a movie about how they just wanted to be a part of the football team and felt excluded by his whole Christian charade.
We don't that seems like a pretty good movie to me.
And there's a variety of reasons why those people don't come out. They don't get, the atheist who stands up to that coach, or even not an atheist, a Christian, minority religion who stands up to that coach, isn't going to get the adulation from the community and get, through all these things we talked about, these networks, all this money, be given the limelight because of that. In fact, they're probably going to face a lot of backlash, unfortunately. So it's up to people like us who have a platform and have a bit of funding, and we can shine the light on those people, which we do. I mean, we give scholarships for students who are activists and things like that. But we have to help them and make them realize we exist, because I think a lot of them don't know necessarily right now that they can come to us and we can help them do that and try to craft the narrative.
And absolutely. The religious right has known for a long time, really always, that their most precious resource is their stories. And if we can just meet them on that field with the stories that we have, which we are incredibly rich with, then I think that we'll really be contenders in, whether you want to call this the culture war or at this point just in an actual war between people who want human rights for everyone and people who don't.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson to take away from this episode, Drew, is, make the human connection. And I think, would you say that, like, if we just focusing on responding to inflammatory statements by like Charlie Kirk and those sorts of people to be just sort of like taking the bait?
Yeah, I think that you can do some response stuff, but I think that if you center all of your platform around that, then at a certain point, yes, I would consider that to be taking the bait, especially if you are appearing alongside someone like Charlie Kirk, which obviously no one is doing now, but if someone was just doing debates with Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk types and Matt Walsh types, shaking their hands and saying, thank you for having a cordial conversation with me, let's continue to just react to each other into oblivion, then yes, I would consider that to be of utilizing one's influence in the most effective way possible. What we have to do, like I've been saying, is to proactively put out education, nuance, and above all, compelling stories. That is how we make change.
And as we wrap it up here, we've had you on our show before, or Ask an Atheist show. We've also had Forrest Valkai on the show, Dave Farina, Emma Thorne. Those are some creators that really appreciate. I'm curious, Drew, who else in the secular YouTube sphere would you like to give a shout out to and think are doing good work out there?
I'm going to say my wife, Taylor, that runs the channel, The Antibot. I think that she does a lot of great critical and important commentary on the separation of church and state and just like evangelical Christian cultural issues. I also want to give a shout out to Alyssa Grenfell, who is an ex-Mormon and really has exploded onto the scene in just the last year and a half or so. And while she does quite well with her videos, very few people in our space seem to realize how influential she already is in just a year and a half. And so Alyssa Grenfell really harnessing the stories that she has growing up as a very devout Mormon to influence people for the better, that definitely deserves a lot of recognition. And I'm sure she would make a great guest if you guys wanted to have her on. Yeah.
Awesome. We'll definitely have to look into that.
Yeah, I'll take a note of that. And then what can viewers do to help support, such as like liking, subscribing, becoming a Patreon, donating? What are some of the best methods?
Oh yeah, all of that stuff, liking, subscribing, Patreon is really great. I always say that, not everybody can necessarily give money, but just sharing the video on your own personal social media does actually help quite a bit in the algorithm. But if I was to do any sort of call to action at the end of this, then I would say go get involved in an actual community, grassroots. Go hang out with people in atheist, secular, humanist, Satanist, whatever you want to call it, community in real life. Build power in your local area, and then partner with organizations like FFRF or American Atheists or American Humanists, and make change in your local area. I'm happy to tell the stories that I'm telling online, but I think that the most important thing that we do is build better lives for ourselves in our real lives, in our immediate local areas, utilizing the resources that people like FFRF give to communities like that. And so that's what I would say people should do after watching this.
Well, thank you for joining us, Drew. You can find Drew at Genetically Modified Skeptic on YouTube. That's going to wrap up this week's episode of Secular Spotlight. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
If you'd like to stay up to date on FFR's activities, subscribe to Free Thought Today, published 10 times a year. It includes church-state separation news, columns about non-theism, a freethinker's crossword puzzle, and so much more. You can learn more at freethoughttoday.com or ffrf.org.